Welcome in everybody to Fantasy Pros. It's time to talk strategy. I'm Joey P. Joe Pisapia. With me, of course, is Jake Ciely from The Athletic, and we're going to talk about our favorite format, or at least mine, Superflex. That's right. Jake Ciely runs the Flex Leagues, and the Superflex is something I've been lucky enough to be in for the last 10 years. I may have won a few championships along that run. Jake might have won one or two also, but this is a format we're very passionate about. And Jake, the one thing that I always say is every year the strategy changes because the pool of players changes so dramatically. The last couple of years, especially in my write-ups for the Black Book, I do the quarterback profiles. And for me, I thought the last two seasons specifically, a lot of youth and inexperience at the position was going to be a problem. It was going to be problematic for offenses collectively, and then things were going to get dragged down. And basically, I was right. This year, I feel differently. A little bit more seasoning from some of these younger quarterbacks, some steps forward from some other ones, and even rebounds and guys who have become, dare I say, prolific. Baker Mayfield and some other guys like that maybe we didn't see quite coming. All of a sudden, there's a little bit more depth at the QB position, but we're going to talk about strategy. So, Jake, before we get into it, I want to remind everybody, if you're watching right here, just drop your comments below, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and you might just win yourself a George Pickens autographed jersey. That's right, a Steelers one, because, well, he doesn't play for the Steelers anymore, so he gave it to us, and we got it autographed at pristineauction.com. Again, drop your comments, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell till it goes ding so you know if you are the big winner of the George Pickens jersey. So, Jake, when you're talking about strategy for Superflex, where do you begin? What's rule number one?
I think rule number one is something people use for any format they're really in, but it really starts to come important. I say utmost importance. It's going to be my first rule is pay attention to your tiers at quarterback, because your first point, which is the second one we're going to get to, my next point, my point being is everything is going to tie back into tiers, in my opinion, because as the draft goes, as the strategies develop, you're going to use the tiers to figure out, when do I jump in? When do I jump back in? Do I take a running back, depending on how the first round is going? Do I take a wide receiver? And the answer is very simply, look at the tiers for your quarterbacks, figure out who's still there in this group. What does that group matter to the rest of the options out there? How big is that third, fourth one that we get into later on? Because all those things are going to determine, well, I'm on the clock in the third round. I want my second quarterback, but should I take him? The answer for the tiers will really help you with that. You, as well know as anybody who's probably watched it at this point, we did a Superflex mocks on this very network.
Yeah.
And if you look at Erickson, we didn't talk about it with him through that draft, but depending on the fact of how his draft fell, because of what was there tiers-wise, some of them got blown up right before he picked, and his second quarterback wasn't until late in the draft, and that's because I believe tiers.
Yeah, I believe in that as well. It's a good rule of thumb. And to Jake's point, you can go back and watch that. It's on the YouTube channel, of course, wherever you get your podcasts as well. I drafted from the one. Jake was more in the middle. Erickson's towards the end, and Fitzy was down at the bottom. So you're really seeing a couple different approaches to that quarterback position in Superflex. And the one that when you're a little bit further down the trough, which is number two, on our list today, is passing on the top quarterbacks and targeting instead of the top guys, because they're probably going to go in the first 5 picks, as we saw. Yeah. It's just the nature of the beast, especially this year, right? You got really 5 very definitive guys that I feel very good about taking. After that, all bets are off. And I think coming away with 2 guys in the top 15 or 16 is still a really good strategy, because it allows you to go ahead and do a Bijan Robinson, Jahmyr Gibbs, or take maybe start with, who knows, you can get Jefferson and CeeDee Lamb the way Fitzy did in that last draft. That's a heck of a way to start a team, or even split the difference, take a wide receiver and a running back, depending on the format. But I think this year, if you're looking at Herbert, Fields, Williams, Purdy, Prescott, even Love, Stroud, guys who were in that number 1 tier going into last season, I think the potential breakout for Drake May's coming, Trevor Lawrence, even Matthew Stafford, CJ Stroud on a bounce back. There's so many ways you can go. If you can get 2 of those guys and kind of just build a good basic quarterback, you can compete, especially if you have the Justin Jeffersons, Jamar Chases, the top 5 or 6 guys. So that is a very viable strategy. And we all know the ADP and Superflex, things get pushed down at the RB and wide receiver positions, especially RB sometimes in that format, especially if it's PPR. So you can make that duo schedule work there, right? When you're trying to make sure you get some quarterbacks that you feel good about, they have the jobs, and they have upside and have given you at least a taste of what QB1 performance looks like. 2 of those guys is certainly a viable strategy as long as you have those big stars carrying your roster. Jake, let's talk about number 3 on your list when we're talking about draft strategies in Superflex for 2025.
Yeah, if 1A was that, this is 1B, and it is the what I'll call the Joe Pisapia special. Because if anybody has read the Black Book, if anybody's been around, I used to contribute it back in the day.
Sorry,
it's the RPV, relative position value. Like when you draft your quarterbacks, and you happen to be somebody who got a tier 1 quarterback, or if you want to go back to that mock draft and watch, is I thought I had 2 top 10 quarterbacks. Is the biggest thing to go back to that first point is like if you take a top 5. Don't wait and make your second quarterback QB 25. Why, Joe? Because Joe knows this. This is the Joe Pisapia special. Is you just threw out your value. You threw away your advantage at the position. Your advantage at position started with having a quarterback that's arguably better than most, if not every other team. So you want to keep that advantage. The same thing goes if you go the other direction. If you can't get one of those top quarterbacks and your value ends up at running back, again, you don't want to take Saquon Barkley in the first round, draft your quarterbacks, throw in some wide receivers, and then turn around and your second running back is Travis Etienne. What was the point of taking Saquon Barkley then? You need to keep that advantage at the positions that you find, because as we talked about on that podcast and say a lot too, is you can't come out of the draft amazing at every position. You have to give up something. Don't give up the value you've already created in the draft, and this is actually a good way to decide how you work your draft, because some of these dictated values are going to come to you depending on who everybody else takes.
And speaking of the relative position value, you'll see in that draft, right? I went and I took Derrick Henry right in the top 3 picks that I had. And then I turned around to make sure I had Kyron Williams, and I'm just going to stay at that running back position because there's not a lot of separation there in those wide receiver 2 to higher end wide receiver 3 range. There's not a lot to separate, right? So just taking a bunch of those guys and playing matchups is going to be far better for me than trying to reach for a wide receiver or overpay for guys that might not move the needle as much. Before we get to number 4 on our list, a quick shout out and reminder too. We keep referencing that draft, and we want you to get prepared for your season. So go to fantasypros.com/mock, or just download the Fantasy Football Draft Wizard app today. Start using the draft simulator. You can practice. It's quick. It's fun. It's easy. You can undo your picks if you don't like the way things are going. And after the draft is done, you get some insights on how you can get better every single time. So I know it's only June as of recording this, but I'm sure you're probably watching this in July and August. Get your mock draft on. Go use Draft Wizard today. Number 4 on our list of draft strategies for Superflex. Something that I started doing in recent years, and I did in spades last year, and it really worked for me very well, which is controlling the scoring in top offenses. That quarterback, running back duo specifically, or if it is more of a passing offense, controlling, that wide receiver quarterback duo. Now, I'm not saying you have to do this, but if it falls in your lap, and it did in that draft I just did, and I just talked about it in your Flex League last year, I had that same combination of Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson, right? That's a heck of a combination that you can kind of pull off. Derrick Henry's probably going to make it close to the end of the third round, right? End of the second round, beginning of the third round. If you're picking first or second, you're probably going to have Lamar Jackson on that board, right? You're going to take him. And next thing you know, you have all of the scoring controlled basically in that offense. So Lamar's rushing a touchdown, he's throwing a touchdown, or he's handing it to Derrick Henry most of the time and he's scoring a touchdown. And then you saw me do it in a smaller capacity with the Minnesota Vikings, an offense I think is undervalued and underrated. In that same mock draft we just did that you can watch on the YouTube channel, took J.J. McCarthy, Hawkinson, and Jordan Addison, right? So a little bit of value in a Kevin O'Connell offense that is pretty damn special in my opinion. So I think that there's lots of ways you can do this. You don't have to do the big ticket one, Jake. You could do the cheaper, more cost-effective one, but investing smartly in good offensive ecosystems in Superflex leagues, especially with your quarterback, is very smart. Not every quarterback you have is going to be in a great offense, unfortunately. So you might not want to go crazy with this, but when you can make it all work in an offense that has upside, I think it's something you can really do well with. All right, let's talk about one more thing that really matters here, and that is the bye weeks. So let's talk about that because that's number 5 on our list today, Jake.
Yeah, it is. And it's one that in normal drafts, I would say, don't worry about it. You can figure things out later, unless maybe you were drafting and you'd have 2 guys in week 5 and you don't want to have to deal with that early. But most of the time, I don't care about bye weeks. I've actually been in leagues where sometimes it just kept falling to me, Joe, and I leaned into it. It was week 9, I think, that year. And I ended up having 60% of my team in week 9. I just threw that week out of the window. Yeah. But at quarterback, with you're talking Superflex, this is actually the one spot where I think it really does matter, because the big thing in Superflex, you do not want to throw both quarterbacks out to the buys and say, well, I don't even have one this week, or have to go to the waiver wire and hope that somebody had an injury and you're picking somebody off the waivers there, or maybe somebody rookie got an early start, because it matters at this point. And even so much so, to tie back into my first point with the tiers, is I talked about it on that show, is I was looking at my third quarterback and I said, you know what? Between these three guys who are all in the same tier for me, one of them had a completely different bye week than my other two options. So I'm never without two quarterbacks. Obviously, injuries could come into play. But the biggest thing is like this year alone, if you like May and Purdy at their values, well, why would you take both with the week 14 bye? Not to mention it's all the way in week 14. So where most leagues, I say, don't worry about buys, Superflex matters, because you want to avoid having two down, potentially all three, and then who knows what you're doing at the position.
All right, so those are 5 great strategies for Superflex. I want to throw a bonus thing out there for everybody too, because I'm sure you get asked this question a ton. I know I do. I talk about it in Black Book. I've talked about it on the podcast, which is, do you take a third quarterback or not? I do. Yeah. I like to have that third quarterback on my roster. Now, I like it to be a quarterback. I just took Cam Ward in that last draft we just did together, pretty late. I like to get a good value on a third quarterback. I'm not going to be the person always to take that third quarterback first, right? I'm not going to be the one that jumps in that pool. But if I'm at the turn and I'm already somebody who doesn't like the way the quarterbacks fell to me potentially, then I'm okay with being aggressive on that third one, especially if it's somebody with upside or rebound potential. But Jake, where do you stand on that third quarterback? Some people say, no, don't worry about it. You don't need it. Other people say it's a must. I say it's something that's a luxury I like to take. Where do you lie?
I think the luxury that I like to take is the best way to put it, because I'd say 8 out of 10 times I want to, but depending, to go back to this whole conversation was kind of baked into the RPV, the tiers and everything. You can't do it every single time. Put it this way, all 36 quarterbacks for 12 teams having 3, like somebody is not going to be able to do it. Multiple teams are not going to be able to do it to actually have 3 starting quarterbacks. But looking at that advantage for me, I was one of the first teams to take a third quarterback, but that's because I was leaning into my value of having a very strong quarterback room. And I didn't want to give that up by just having 2 weeks where I don't have that advantage. I was throwing out the advantage if I don't take that third quarterback. So I'm with you. If the value is right in the way that the draft is falling, ideally I would like to, because people are going to be chasing. As soon as you get out of the draft, you have multiple teams that are not having to start a third quarterback. So to have that luxury, as you put it, is a very nice way to do it. But I will say this too, as we get out on this, if you're worried about that, if you don't like that thought, then do a 10-team Superflex league just to dip your toe in if you haven't yet. And then you don't have to be fretting about that.
There you go. Don't fret, everybody. Instead, drop your comments below. Let us know your favorite QB value this year. I want to hear from all of you. Drop your comments below. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. We're trying to get to 300,000 this year, and we can do it with your help. And, of course, when you drop your comments and subscribe and ring the bell till it goes ding for notifications, you might win yourself a free George Pickens autographed jersey. That'll do it for us, but the story of the game goes on. For Jake Ciely, I'm Joey P. We'll see you next time, kids.